Cool. And Maxime
I
sometimes
did
thinks he's
forget
hearable.
to put on the desktop audio, so almost a
Suspicious.
soundless recording.
You don't want that. You don't want that. Okay, we even have Legend himself, Banana Tart, joining in. I think now we can probably start. Don't expect people to be so
Yeah,
late.
I think most
Should we
people
wait
are.
like 1 more minute? What do you guys think?
Mhm.
And then Maxime,
For me, you can just
we
start.
just give.
Yeah, I think you can
Just go.
start.
All right, then let's get started, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, who am I kidding? Gentlemen, welcome to the first competitive gathering. It's going to be about drafting. One specific topic within drafting being narrating draft. First of all, I'm going to quickly go over what competitive gatherings are, because this one is the first one for a lot of people. It was already done last year. I believe at that time it was only done by Floris and Maxime. And now the idea is that we're doing it with more people. They are lectures. So we're going to have lectures.
Nice.
Of about dividing everybody who wants.
Oh, Quinn,
What?
Quinn,
The internet,
you dropped after in our lectures, and then you froze.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, wait, can you hear me still?
Yeah.
Can you hear me again?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay.
Yeah, it's just
Okay,
for a second.
Oh, well, that's unlucky. What was I saying? Lectures. We're doing lectures of about 30 to 40 minutes, and then we're doing discussion afterwards where we're dividing everybody up in groups and discuss a few exercises that we come up with. The idea is this time that it will be not only run by Maxime and Floris like last time, but more of like a community thing. So we have like a team of 4 right now, me, Henry, Maxime and Floris. We're doing the first 3 lectures, and then afterwards we'd like it if other people also make lectures. And if that doesn't happen, then, well, that's a shame. But we'll see. If you guys are interested in making a lecture, then let us know. All right, this one is about drafting. But we're not going to talk about exactly what kind of champions you need to pick. The problem is with that is that there are way too many viewpoints on the draft. I don't know if you follow a lot of like pro players, but they can never agree on what the right champions are to pick. So instead, that seems kind of pointless. We'll always disagree about that. Instead, we're going to be talking about how to communicate within a draft. This presentation is really team focused. So it's really about like if you're in a DSEA team or any kind of team, how do you communicate with the rest of your teammates? What are your roles within the draft when you're talking within the draft? And it's going to also go over like a base level of understanding which you need really to be able to effectively communicate with your teammates about the draft. Right. Going to go to the overview. So first of all, we're going to go quickly over the draft roles. I'm calling them draft roles. Just like within League of Legends, you have your 5 lanes. Within the draft, you can also have a role. I'm going to go over that in a second. Then after that, we're talking about the base level that I was talking about. We're going to go over a few ways to divide up champions in certain contexts, in certain like functions. You'll see that. And then afterwards, we're going to talk about the importance of context within a draft. And then we'll go in depth on what the narrator should do, which is one of the draft rules, which we will go over in a second. And then I'm going to talk about, then I'm going to give you guys some exercises after a break. So first of all, the draft rules. These are the 4 rules. They're going from simplest to highest level of complexity. First of all, you have the answerers, then specialists. Specialists, you want everybody to be a specialist. Preferably, you would like everybody to be a flex picker, and you want to have one narrator on the team, but preferably you want everybody to have the understanding of a narrator, and we're going to go over them in detail. First of all, the answer. What does the answerer do? Answerer, when you're an answerer in your team, you simply agree with the champions that are being suggested. So, for example, your narrator might say, are you okay with playing Poppy here? You simply say yes or no. You don't need to have much understanding about the game. Usually you are an answerer if you haven't put that much thought into the game, and if you don't have that much knowledge about the draft. Usually when somebody is being asked, something's being asked of you, you want to just reply with yes, because the other people that are asking you, generally speaking, have more knowledge of the game than you. This is not what you would want to be. We want the answerers to think more and become specialists, which is this, what I'm going over right now. A specialist, what he or she can do is think more critically about the game. Think about each pick that they have to their disposal, which champions they play, know the matchups, the strengths of the champions, and the compatibility with other champions on their team, and through that come to a good choice of champion for the situation. What they need to be doing is thinking at every stage of the draft So it doesn't matter which pick you were at. Always think to yourself, if you're a specialist, what would I pick here if my narrator asks me what I want to pick? So even if it's early on in the draft and you're playing top lane and you think, probably not going to pick top lane early, still think to yourselves, if I did have to pick, what do I need to pick here? This is really important because it makes the speed at which you can discuss the draft much faster. If you need to start thinking when you are being called on, then it's going to be too slow. That's very important for a specialist. We would like every team member to at least be a specialist because that'll make the quality of your champion picks in general much higher. We're going to talk about a flex picker, of course. We understand that some champions do not just fit in a single lane, but can go into multiple roles. And a flex picker really understands that. And to be able to understand that, he must understand the champion pool of the entire team. So you need to put in the work of understanding which champions your teammates can play. And then you can suggest to your narrator certain picks that don't only fit in your own lane, but could also go flex to other lanes. And then the big man, the narrator. What the narrator does is he's basically talking 75% of the time during the draft. What the narrator does is he basically calls out whatever is happening. If you see a champion coming in on whatever pick, you say, hey, that's the champion that's coming in. What does the champion do? So what kind of identities does the champion have? Really quick example, imagine you see Rakan or something, then what you could call out is, hey, it's Rakan. It's a first pick Rakan. Rakan, he has two identities. He can either go in, which is his favorite identity, or he can go more of a peeling approach. Whether that is completely correct or not does not really matter in this case, but you are always talking and making your teammates think about what is happening. After you've done talking, or while you're talking as a narrator, you need to call upon the others in the draft. So you're asking your specialists, hey, what would you pick here? You're asking your flex picker, what kind of flex picks do we have open? And maybe you're asking an answerer, hey, are you okay with playing this? There's too little time for more than one narrator because, as I said, narrators talking 75% of the time, and you can't really have a full-on discussion during the draft. That's something you want to do afterwards. So basically, you need to trust your narrator. It's important that within your team, you choose the one person who you trust the most with the most drafting skills, and then afterwards, maybe you don't agree with something they say, but that's something you discuss after the draft. Okay, and we're going to go into more detail in how you would be talking as a narrator a little bit further on. Now, let's talk about a few things that you need to be thinking about. First of all, the champion divisions which I came up with are the two most important things that I'm always thinking about during the draft, things that I always mention when I see new champions coming in, when I am narrating a draft, are two things, their direction and their power curve. First, we're going to talk about the direction. So the main thing, the sort of comp and champion that you see the most in being picked at pretty much all levels of play are dive champions. Dive champions are the ones that can have the initiative. They are always making plays happen because they have the tools to do so. They are, generally speaking, high mobility, low range champions that need to move forward into the enemy team. A dive champion can also be called an engage champion or whatever other name you want to give for it. But the most important thing is that as a dive champion, you're moving into the enemy team. And as I say, most of the time they have high mobility, low range. Generally speaking, they have a small window of time during a team fight where they are very strong. Like, for example, you're playing Nocturne, you're ulting in, then you have a pretty small window to kill your target, at least if you're playing like a very high assassin style. Of course, it's open to interpretation. And then afterwards, if you don't kill your target within that time, usually you're the one that's going to die. So a dive champion needs to go into close proximity to the enemy carries. And a dive champion is really good against a poke champion. A poke champion moves in the opposite direction as a dive champion. What a poke champion wants to do is they have high range, low mobility, so basically the opposite of a dive champion. They try to always stay, make it so that the distance between them and the enemy team is equal to their range, but not make it so that you are in the opponent's range. So you want to be in that right spot of range. And that is really hard to do against a dive comp because, as I said, or dive champions, because they have high mobility, so they can basically choose how far they want to stand away from your team. So basically, yeah, poke champion wants to move backwards, dive champion wants to move forwards. And then, what is a poke champion then good against? A poke champion is good against a stand your ground champion, or as you could sometimes call it, like a peel champion or a counter engage champion. Those are basically champions which have low mobility and low range, but because they have low mobility and low range, they're usually really strong at low range. And therefore, they are very good against dive champions because the dive champions have to get into their range. Stand your ground champions just stand still. They're going to sit at an objective and say, hey, come into us if you want to, because we're going to win a fight in very close proximity. A very extreme example of a stand your ground champion is something like Alawi. She puts down her tentacles. She's really bad if she just gets poked out from a distance, but she's really strong if the enemy team is coming into her. Generally speaking, the stand your ground champions lack the tools to get into close proximity. So that's why they're good against dive champions who have to come into close proximity to do anything. It's not as clear cut as just poke, dive, and stand your ground champions, however. I made a bit of like a schematic here. I could probably spend way more time pinpointing exactly where I would place certain champions. So it's not really about the exact points of the champions, but it's placements of the champions, but it's about the idea that champions are not just in one certain column. Like they're basically on all three axes, and the more in the middle a champion is, like Cho'Gath, for example, he can use his Q defensively if people are coming into him, and then he would be functioning as a stand your ground champion. But he can also use his Q, throw out random Qs to poke or to follow up on a dive. So basically, Cho'Gath can go pretty much every way. He's a very flexible champion, while something else, like a Braum, is a bit less flexible. He's really strong if champions come into him, but he's not as strong as at like poking other champions or running into enemy champions, basically. So that's one of the champion divisions, which I always call out. And then you have the power curve, another very important aspect.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah,
How
of
would
course.
sustain champs fit into the figure?
That's a really good question.
In the previous
for the most part, champions we would save questions for the end, is what I wanted to say.
Okay.
But like an example, like Soraka, for example, you might want. Is that like a sustained champion that you're thinking of?
Yeah, for example.
Okay. Well, a champion like Soraka is pretty flexible, of course, because of their itemization. She can build like a movement speed buffs that can help your teams to dive, for example, but it can also function as like a stand your ground champion. So actually, enchanters are a very flexible class that are usually centered around the middle of the circle. I would say, at least personally, because they also have access to like poke, and when they're in like a poke war, they can like heal up their carries. So they're also really good in like poke comp, but also like Lulu, for example, is really good when you're playing against dive champions like Zed or something, or like Diana. Then you can make it so that your carry survives the initial burst of the dive champions, and then, as I said, they usually have a small window of power. Then, if you survive that window of power, usually you win the fight. So, in that sense, they could also be seen as stand your ground. In certain comps, they would function like that. But as I said, they can also like have the Shirelias, and then it would be more dive. So this is a very flexible class. Usually, enchanters can be picked up pretty early in a draft because they are so flexible. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, that's clear. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you for the question. I'd save further questions for the end. So I was going into the second part of the champion division, how I divide champions. Power curve. Basically, there's three sort of, well, it's not really, you can't really divide it into three like this, because it's really just about like the slope of the win rate curve, and the slope can go from this all the way to that, and anything in between. But I divide it into three for the purpose of analysis. So first of all, we have pressuring champions. Champions like Jarvan, champions like Renekton, great examples. They are very strong in the early game. They try to get a very strong lead early and close out the game fast before the enemy champions can skill. They usually have a win rate curve that looks a bit like this. I got the win rate curves. I think this is Renekton's win rate curve. This is a bit of a champion that I think is a little bit overpowered, because looking at the win rate, starts at 55 and doesn't really drop too low. So this is a bit of an overpowered champion here in this example. That would be a pressuring champion. What is good against pressuring champions are, generally speaking, neutralizing champions. Neutralizing champions have a very constant win rate across the entire game. As you see here, this y-axis only goes between 50 and 52. I think this was Gragas or Karma, one of the two. Very stable champion throughout the game. Generally speaking, they are good at all stages of the game. They are good at minimizing early disadvantages, so they make it so that the pressuring champions cannot take the game away really fast. And then, generally speaking, later into the game, they become stronger than pressuring champions. So neutralizing champions are good against pressuring champions. But a lot of neutralizing champions, like, say, Seraphine, are not that good at punishing really heavy scalers. So scaling champions, which have a very upward sloped win rate curve, are generally good against neutralizing champions. Scaling champions, not so good at getting elite early. They need the game to last long, and therefore are pretty weak to pressuring champions. So it's once again a bit of a rock, paper, scissors. Unlike the other champion division, it's not really possible to have like the 3-axis thing, because you don't really have like something in between pressuring or scaling. It's really just about the angle of the win rate curve, you could say. And then on one end, you have very scaling champions like Kyo and Cassin. On the other hand, you have very pressuring champions like Nidalee or Jarvan. If you look at their win rate curves, you can kind of see how they are angled. And generally speaking, you want, against pressuring champions, you want neutralizing champions. Against scaling champions, against neutralizing champions, you want scaling champions. And against scaling champions, you want pressuring champions. Okay, so now I went over the main ways to divide up champions. This is a bit bugged with the animation. But you must always consider context, of course. A champion, like I said, some champions are very flexible. They can have certain roles that are different to their roles in depending on what kind of team comp they're in or what team comp they're playing against. So, okay, I'm just gonna put everything on screen because it didn't really go so well with the animations. So let's say Vel'Koz, for example, if he's playing support with Varus against a Jinx Lulu lane, for example, then of course he's going to do his best to make it so that Jinx and Lulu are not going to be able to scale. In this case, Vel'Koz is going to play a pressuring role. He's going to take a pressuring role. He's still going to be a poke champion. Like usual, Vel'Koz almost always going to be a poke champion. And in this case, he's proactively using his abilities to try to deny Jinx and Lulu the scaling. While in another matchup, like mid lane, if he's playing versus Lucian, then he would be more neutralizing. He's reacting to what Lucian is doing. So he's going to be waiting for Lucian to use his abilities and then use his abilities in return. And here you can see that depending on like the matchup, and of course, the entire team comp around it also matters a lot. But this is just in isolation already a pretty clear example of how a champion can take on different roles depending on what he's with or what he's against. Like their identity of some champions is just very flexible. Then how does this all come together? That's of course also really important because you're not just looking at individual champions but also at compositions. First point, important one, is you need to always try to be responding to what your opponent is choosing. So even if you might have drafted a poke champion, if your opponent is going full dive, you don't want to full commit to the poke. So that is very important. Early on in the draft, you want to draft flexible champions that are towards the middle of that circle that I showed earlier. Champions that can kind of take on multiple identities. That's a pick 1 to 3, also referred to as the core sometimes. A lot of teams have like their favorite core of champions that are like flexible, have many identities, and a core kind of defines what you're trying to do as your team. But of course, you should still be responding to what your opponent is doing. And then pick 4 to 5, you can draft more defined champions, like I call them, champions that really excel in one of the things, like poke, stand your ground, dive. Important things, you don't want to combine champions that are reliant on moving in different directions, and reliant on what I mean by reliant are like champions that are very, very defined in what they want to do. Like, you don't really want to combine a Xerath with a Hecarim, for example, because that creates a vulnerability. If you combine Xerath and Hecarim, they're not going to be close together in the fights, and therefore you can kind of isolate them from each other in a fight, or they're going to be isolating themselves in a fight. And then if your team comp is good at punishing that, then generally speaking, you could say you've outdrafted them, basically. But we're not going to go into too much detail on punishing vulnerabilities. That would be a whole other lecture. What you do want to do is combine champions with different power curves. Generally speaking, it's about the average angle of your power curve across your team. Because, like, yeah, all of the champions coming together, if you have all scaling champions, then you don't have anything to get you through the early game. So combining champions of different power curves, totally good. Combining champions that are like very polarized in their direction, generally speaking, not something you want to do. So here we have an example. Ziggs, if I had to ask you guys, is he a poke, a stand your ground, or a dive champion? What would you guys answer? Is there anybody who would like to answer? Somebody who wants to give it a try. Do we have any Ziggs mains in the chat?
I'm not a Ziggs main, but I would say poke.
Mm-hmm. You would say poke?
Yeah.
Primarily?
Ground, and primarily poke, and maybe secondary stand your ground, since he has like his little fields which you don't want to run through, and his bomb to push you to another location.
I absolutely like how you're thinking. Thank you for the answer. I agree. Oh, go for it, Dylan.
Yeah, well, the thing is, he also has some kind of pressure because the way that he's played also factors in, because he is very, very push heavy, so he's also pressurizing to some extent.
Absolutely, that would come into like the power curve, because I think Ziggs' power curve is like very flexible, like you say. You can like go for the heavy shove, really pressure hard. So I said power curve is kind of neutralizing, but that's very, really flexible. And but as I think Thijs said it. I agree. I would say Ziggs is most of the time going to be functioning as like a poke champion, but he also has a few stand your ground elements in his kit with the minefield and the ability to reposition himself with his W. And then we have another example, Gangplank. What do you guys think? Is he really a poke champion or a dive champion or a stand your ground champion? Does anybody have a thought on this?
Also not really a Gangplank main, but I'd say almost all three. He can poke with ult and barrels and Q. He can stand his ground around his barrels, and he can dive if he has Duskblade and goes in, kills someone, goes invisible, and gets out again.
The Duskblade idea is funny. I didn't think of that actually, but I completely agree. Outside of that, I definitely think he's a very balanced champion. Thank you for your answer, by the way, Peter. I would say he's primarily stand your ground, or that's the strongest thing he's at, because, well, like you said, he can kind of, if he's forcing people to come into his barrels, then he's doing maximum damage. But he can also poke with his barrels. And I was thinking with dive more that his ultimate is a great dive tool, or an engage tool. It facilitates like the dive on your team, so he can fit into a dive composition because he has that strong ultimate. And for the power curve, he's mostly like, he's between neutralizing and scaling. His power curve is slightly slanted upwards. Thank you for your answer. All right, now that we've gone over that, what exactly are you saying as a narrator? Most important thing is talk between every single pick. You always want to be talking. Step 1, after each pick, call out literally the champion identity and team comp identity. Really straightforward. Just go back to the things I just discussed. So an example, they picked Hecarim B1. Hecarim is a heavy diver with a lot of early pressure. So we mention the direction and we mention the power curve. Or something like they picked Seraphine B1. Seraphine is a flexible identity, can neutralize yet still scale. Damn, we are fucked. Bit of a joke. You're not necessarily fucked, but ban Seraphine, believe me. Step 2, call out what your team would like in response. Go back to the rock, paper, scissors. We need champion picks here which allow us to stand our ground. Preferably something that neutralizes some of Hecarim's early pressure. Okay? Or we need flexible champions. Like if you see flexible champions, you need flexible champions. We need flexible champions which benefit from the relatively easy scaling that Seraphine allows. So Seraphine is a bit towards the neutralizing side, so you can go for a bit more scaling. Then step 3 is after you've said those few lines, You're going to ask your team. You're going to call upon your team. What do they want to do? They have been thinking about what you've been saying. What do they want to pick? So step 3 is ask your flex pickers and specialists what they would choose based on what you said. So an example would be, does this make you think of a good flex, Bob? And then you can add in your own suggestions if you want. I'm personally thinking of Heimerdinger or Shogoth, for example. But you don't need to add in your own suggestions. I'm a fan of doing it because it usually speeds up the thinking process a little bit. Or, for example, here, Steve, do you have a good jungler here? If you want, you can add in that you suggest a certain jungler. Then they will answer, and then usually the narrator is the one doing like a pro draft or something, so you lock in the pick. All right, I'm just gonna go for a quick example, which I narrated once, one of my team's games. We are going to be the red side in this example. So, for example, here what I would say is, all right, they picked Kai'Sa B1. Kai'Sa doesn't really fit into a poke composition, so that means we can kind of draft towards more stand your ground characters, and Kai'Sa is quite pressuring, so let's pick some slightly more neutralizing champions. I would ask my flex picker, hey, I would ask the team in general, like, what kind of flex picks do we have open? They responded. We got Gragas and Tristana, a couple powerful flexes, pretty flexible, also allow us to stand our ground. And I said, all right, let's pick Tristana. Then I asked the jungler, what kind of champions do you have? Because my jungler doesn't have a very large champion pool, so he needs to pick early. So I asked him, what kind of champions do you have that allow us to stand our ground if necessary? And he says Fiddlesticks or Nunu. I say, all right, let's lock in Fiddlesticks. That's pick phase number 1. We will make the slides available, by the way. I wrote everything out, but I'm not going to show that right now. We're going further. Lilia and Leona are being picked up by the enemy team. I say, all right, they are dipping further into dive with Leona and Kai'Sa, so we can really commit to the stand your ground idea. If they don't go for the dive, then they're hurting their own team composition. So I ask as my support, they showed their entire bot lane. What support can help neutralize their pressuring bot lane and also stand their ground? And my support is more an answerer. So I ask him, "Are you okay with Poppy?" He says yes. So we lock in Poppy. Then after the second ban phase, which we are skipping through right now, it's not really about bans in this case, but you can figure out the bans with like a similar thought process, but it's also targeted towards our specific opponents, of course. And we say, okay, well, Saya also goes well into the idea of like a stand your ground, like an anti-dive bot lane. So pick up Saya there. They round out their comp with Urgot Morgana. I say, all right, so they pivoted back into a stand your ground composition, which is pretty strange. We can just go on with our stand your ground composition, and we will be stronger because our carries are going to have more range. Top lane is the last lane that's left unpicked. So because we're flexing Tristana to mid lane, so I asked my top laner, what kind of picks are you thinking of? He says, let's go Gangplank, or what else did he suggest? I don't remember exactly, but I say, all right, let's go Gangplank. And now we drafted our composition. Of course, in Champion Select, you're going to go over how you win the game. That's not really what we're here for today. So that's it. Well, thank you guys for listening so far. Now it's time for a bit of a break, and afterwards we're going to do some exercises together. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them now.
How long is the break?
Let's say the break is 5 minutes, and then we'll divide everybody up into groups, if that sounds okay for everyone.
You said something about not drafting champions who go in entirely different directions. For example, I think stand your ground and poke go well together. Would you see that as a different direction?
Yeah, so I see what you mean. Like, you need sort of a bit more, like, protecting champions to protect your pokers, sort of, like, to keep distance, right? Sort of how you... Yeah. So, if you're playing against, like, dive, and you already have poke champions, then yeah, you should complement them with champions that allow them to stand your ground. Yeah, for sure. Okay. But if your opponents have no way to come into your poke champions if they don't have the ability to do so. They are like 0 mobility. Then you don't necessarily have to combine it with stand your ground champions. Does that make sense?
Yep, makes sense.
All right, perfect. Any other questions?
How long is the break?
5 minutes. 4 minutes are left of them. And yeah, Nick, I think that might be the game that you think it was.
Nick, fuck you.
Funny.
Oh
Right.
no!
I'm gonna explain why this happened as well. Go back to the slide.
Wait,
no,
that was the next game.
To be honest,
Okay.
it all depends that you should know it.
You,
Yeah.
you wanna know why I got Morgana and not Lilia? Because Justin didn't want to trade, and I was very mad.
Yeah.
I don't know how much better Lilia was in Tristana, but it's,
Well, the
it's a
fact
different
is-
matter.
It's still not good, but then I can walk away from my lane without crying.
Both matchups
Yeah.
are bad, to be honest.
Yeah, but I'd rather play Lilia. Like the whole thing was, yeah, we can flex Lilia, and he was like, yeah, pick me Morgana. I said, sure. So okay, you play Morgana now, and I'm like,
don't take it too seriously. I mean, this is just an example, of course. It was just like one of the most recent drafts we did. So.
yeah, but you gotta know that we don't have any idea what we're doing. It's just like, what do you like to play? I'll play this. Sure.
Yeah, no, that's what we're here for, right? I mean, that's what I'm here for. I'm trying to sort of help you guys, I guess, find an idea.
But to be honest, the whole point as well is this type of picking and flex picking is more or less if you have a large champion pool. In my case, like if you pick Tristana, I'm already useless. I don't have anything.
Heimer.
For sure.
To Heimer.
Fuck.
Yeah, but then maybe it's good to like think about like if all your champions are really in a certain like really kind of a similar identity, you might want to think about adding like a champion to your pool which is in like a different identity, so you have that more flexible picking style in a draft. If you understand what I mean.
Oh yeah. I've been trying that. If you look at my matchups, you can see a lot of red and a lot of 4-11s.
Nice.
That's the story.
You gotta power
And that's
through
where-
those, man.
Oh, fuck no.
Eventually you'll get there. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Oh yeah,
Oh, nice.
another thing. I saw something about you place Nidalee a lot like pressurizing and not like neutralizing. Well, I think that she has a lot of points that can be seen as neutralizing as well because she's early very strong, but she is not a champion that suffers from late game because the way if you build her correctly, that is of course, her damage and her mobility still stays while also providing peel and healing and sustainability. So she's in between everything again.
Yeah, that comes back to like the point I made all the way at the beginning, where like everybody has different views on like certain each champion, right? So yeah, don't take like every single placement of every champion like super like really seriously because like I said, everything can be like seen in different ways. Like everybody sees certain champion strengths as in other ways that other people do. Like there's a lot of people that would disagree with me when I say that Kai'Sa is a heavy dive champion, for example, and so there's nothing wrong with that. Absolutely, I can definitely agree with you. Like there's so much room for discussion there, but that's not really the point of the lecture. I hope you understand.
I think the thing with Nidalee is that she's really hard to play. I think in the later stage of the game, in team fights and stuff, you need to like hit the spears on the targets you want with, and that's like you need to be good at Nidalee to do that. So I think like it's more of the execution than actually the champion itself. For Nidalee at least.
Yeah, I think with a lot of these high skilled champions that it's the case.
Yeah.
Okay, I was just thinking it would be good to share this PowerPoint with you guys because the exercises are inside of it. Guess I'll just share it in the the lounge chat.
Hey, Georgie's here.
Hype.
See, I'm here.
Welcome.
Always on time.
Yeah, stream on 2 screens. I didn't know what time it is.
Don't worry about it.
I'm gonna buy you a watch.
Did you bring
Okay, I like that. What you talking?
Rolex?
A paper
It's a Rolex?
Time's always on
Georgie.
7.
Yeah.
Did
You
you
did.
buy any
Cheapskate,
bread
not
for
even a
Timmy?
Rolex.
Any bread for Timmy? Yeah. I have some tiger bread for his Tiger or Deer gameplay.
Lekker.
Nice. We even have the tiger
I'm
here.
maxing tiger stance next game. Just to get my bread.
I'm dodging next game.
Well, no bread for me, I guess. Guess I'll buy.
When did you watch MSI?
I have it open right now.
Nice.
It's a fucking bloodbath,
What do
apparently.
you think about the opening game?
I didn't. I missed that one.
Really?
Yeah,
It was
Cloud9
a really good
Christmas.
game.
Dude, that was a fun game. That was really fun.
I think actually Cloud9 can scale for Worlds.
Yeah, the draft showed so much promise. It was really impressive, actually.
It was absolute draft kingdom from Cloud9.
Yeah,
but
they choked it.
They got gapped. I think
Oh,
Top Jungle got stage nerfs.
I don't really
A
think they
little bit.
choked it. Like Damwon just really showed extremely dominant macro decisions, I
True.
think.
Yeah, Damon Macro was nice, but
That one's so good. Yeah.
But I actually
if
don't
Cloud9 played
think
well, they shouldn't lose with that draft.
yeah, we're scaling, but I actually don't think either teams played well. Like a lot blundered quite a lot. I mean, knowing that Damwon was the world champion, like I expected a bit more. I don't know if I'm putting the bar a bit high, but
Yeah, probably a bit high. I've seen like I don't know. Is the other game today? I've seen it as well. Like Infinity versus Detonation Folks. Me and that game was kind of like a mess. If you compare that to
Holy
Damwon.
fuck, this
and,
engage is a mess.
That was crazy.
yeah, but I mean, these are major leagues we're talking about. They're like
Not
the other leagues are like wild card leagues. If we're not, I mean, it's yes, we're professionals, but it's like yeah, it's like EU Masters and LEC. There's a difference.
That was the weirdest engage ever.
Yeah, wildcards are a bit weak, I think.
What about Turkish League?
Oh, it's playing right now, right?
That engage didn't look too hot. No.
Oh, I was not.
I'm not watching those.
It's a
Only
max
watch
range
Major
Rumble
League
ult on a set, no on a Darius. With no follow up. And then they got fucked, lost Baron, and it's over.
Let's analyze the drafts. I say of.
All right, guys. The groups have been made for the discussion. I'm gonna share them. They've been made by Henry. Thank you, Henry.
You're welcome.
They're grouped based on what. If you are in a DSA team, then you've been put together, and if kind of the same skill level been put together.
Where are you posting?
Nick with the bronze.
I'll post them in the CG lounge. So if the top group, I'll also put like we have 5 voice chats. Let me see how we do this. 2,
I
3.
think we draw group of death.
It's not a competition. It's about discussing with each other what you would do with the exercises.
It's a competitive gathering, though, so it's got to be competitive.
Yeah. If you want to see it as a competition, then by all means go for it.
Going to
Sure.
I would say if everybody can move to the voice channels in your groups, I'll be going by every voice channel and like asking if you guys are doing okay with the exercises. The exercises are all at the end of the PowerPoint, which I shared. I think you guys should be able to open it in the CG lounge as well. Did anybody try it?
For me.
Yeah, you can open it.
Okay, perfect. Then, all right. I wish you guys good luck. Move to the correct voice channels, please, and I will be hopping around.
Yo, thanks, Quinn. What's like?
Nice.
We are having time now. Fuck.
That's the queen.
Dylan
Bad.
Sebastian.